hot ramp. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Curtiss P-40. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on it and how we got to this aircraft. And then we'll talk about what it was used for, and you'd be surprised it was used in a lot of places all the way around the world. So the Curtiss P-40 actually started back in the early 30s with the Curtiss P-36 airframe. Now this was a radial powered airplane that had the Pratt & Whitney 1830 twin row 14-cylinder engine. And it was a pretty good performer, but it was really known for its ruggedness. The airframe was well built, and it could do really well acrobatically in the air. But the Army Air Corps back in the 30s, they weren't so concerned with fighter interception at the time. They were looking at long-range strategic bombing. And so the Air Corps really was settled in to basically defend our coasts on the east and west coast. Now, from a designer's perspective, this is kind of advantageous because you don't need to fly particularly high, but you do need to be well constructed, because if you're close to the ground going after ships coming in or in support of the troops, you've got to be able to take a lot of damage and keep on flying. And so that was what they started out with the design in mind. Now, when they were taking a look at what was already out there with the P-36, it was a less than 300-mile-an-hour airplane. And so they wanted to develop an aircraft that could fly much faster, but yet maintain that ruggedness for its mission. So Curtiss decided they would take an Allison 1710, that's a 12-cylinder V engine, and apply it to the P-35 airframe. So, P-36, sorry. So initially they were going to call this aircraft the P-37. Now this would be an Allison that would actually be turbo supercharged, not like if this aircraft is here. But it turned out that that adds a lot of extra plumbing to the airplane. It also changed its flight characteristics. So when they were testing it, it wasn't really a very big hit with pilots. It was complicated, and Curtiss was realizing that with the outbreak of war in Europe virtually almost going to happen, and with the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1938, the Army Air Corps and other air forces around the world were going to need a capable airplane in large numbers very quickly. So they abandoned the idea of a turbo supercharge and started to develop what would be known as the XP-40. Now this would be, as I said, an Allison-powered aircraft. It would actually have two twin 50 calibers up on top of the nose there. And in the wing, they had accommodations for a 30 caliber Browning machine gun in each wing. But that was just accommodations. It didn't actually start out that way. The radiator was located actually under the airplane, much like a P-51. And when they tested this aircraft, it turned out it struggled to actually reach 300 miles an hour. So Curtiss decided this is not acceptable, because the Army Air Corps wants something much higher performing than that. So they decided to relocate the radiators up to the nose. And that move helped improve the top speed of the aircraft and help with its performance. So the first prototypes, as I said, were barely able to make 300, but with that change, they could get up to 324 miles an hour. So the Army Pursuit Contest at Wright Field in 1939 was coming up, and Curtiss submitted the XP-40 for that race, or contest, or won the contest. So it was actually given an order for $13 million to build airplanes. Now this raised a lot of eyebrows, because they knew that this aircraft wasn't going to be the high performer such as the German 109 or the Spitfire. And they're wondering, why are we spending all this money on an aircraft that is soon to be surpassed in numbers? But already, like I said, the Japanese were already at it, and in 1939, so was Germany. So Curtiss went ahead and started building these, and although the Army Air Corps only ordered some, they found that France and England ordered a bunch of these aircraft because they needed them in numbers very soon. So the P-40 would get built. It would be known here in the States as the WarHawk. It would have a retractable tail wheel, which improved the aerodynamics of the airplane, and would start getting deliveries in June of 1940. They would have provisions in the wings. The 50 calibers would stay in the nose, but they would have provisions for 30 caliber machine guns, 2 in each wing. And for export, those were changed over to the Browning 303s because that was the standard those countries were using, but it's an easy changeover. This is the aircraft that would actually go to war in the Battle of Britain. And they discovered early on, because the altitudes that were required in Britain at that time were much higher than the limitations of the Allison engine. The Allison engine has a single supercharger that's built into the engine, and its best performance really is between about 10 and 15,000 feet. As you get above 15,000 feet, the air starts to get pretty thin. And just like us, where if you go hiking in the mountains, it gets harder to breathe up there. Well, engines that are running are just like that. So altitudes above that, the horsepower would drop off, and therefore the performance of the airplane. However, in areas like Africa and Italy, where it was involved with the ground support, the P-40 would actually become legendary. Because of its construction, it could take an enormous amount of ground fire, either small arms or large arms, take a lot of damage, and still bring pilots home. From that experience, Curtiss learned that the first P-40s needed some improvements. So they came out with what was known as the P-40B. Now this would have twin machine guns, 50s up on top, and it would also have the same 30 calibers in the wings. But now it would have self-sealing fuel tanks. There would be armor for the pilot, and there would also be armored glass around the cockpit. But all this would add weight, and the more you weigh, the less performance you're going to get from the same engine. But this model was built in numbers. It was sent to the Philippines and would also be on the ground at Pearl Harbor on December 7th. Now, if we look at the Pacific, at the time of Pearl Harbor, there really was only 3 aircraft available to us to defend that part of the world. That would be the P-39, the Navy's F-4F, and the P-40. Even though there was more modern designs on the drawing board or already being tested, this was the primary aircraft that was available to do the job. Now in China, they really didn't have much of an air force to speak of, and the Japanese were having a real field day with them. So they got a general named Claire Chennault to come over and do some consulting with them to figure out how they were going to be able to defend their country. There are people that came to talk to our president at the time, Franklin Roosevelt, got approval to have airplanes sent over there. And what Chennault did was he found mostly Navy and Marine pilots, some Army pilots, that were willing to come over there and fly these airplanes against the Japanese. And this would be known as the American Volunteer Group. Now the AVG would be in place really just after Pearl Harbor. And these guys did very well against the Japanese types. But Chennault knew you had to play to the strengths of the P-40. Now the aircraft like the Zero is much lighter. It can turn much quicker at slower speed. So Chennault found that if you take this aircraft here, it did very well at a high-speed dive. It was fast, and so they worked in pairs that they could just hit and run and then get away, and that helped save a lot of pilots. It would come out, it would improve on the self-sealing tanks and also include a drop tank because the original aircraft didn't have a great range. But then the big upgrade came with the P-40D. This aircraft had a new Allison engine that was built a little bit differently. It was a little bit shorter, and it allowed for more space up in the nose. And so they increased the size of the radiators there. And starting with that airplane, you now had the classic look of today's P-40. The cowling machine guns were gone, and there would be 4 50 caliber machine guns in the wings. But there also would be shackles for 500 pounds of bombs and also wing hardpoints. This aircraft would be known in other countries as the Kitty Hawk. P40E went to 6 50 caliber machine guns, and this aircraft was given in large, not given, but sold in large numbers to both New Zealand and the Australian Air Force. And some also went to Canada. And this airplane would be the one really involved in the day-to-day battles for the Pacific. It would get a nickname as the Kitty Bomber. For a while, there was a P40F that they toyed around with actually putting a Packard Merlin engine into the aircraft to improve its high-speed or high-altitude performance. And this was worked on for a while, but it felt that it would be better to direct those engines into the P51. The P40N would be the final iteration that was built in numbers. It would also have a more powerful engine. It would improve pilot visibility and would have a slightly longer fuselage to help with stability. Now, this aircraft would be superseded eventually in late 43, 44 by airplanes that have a little bit more fame. The Vought Corsair, the Grumman F6F Hellcat, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, Republic P-47, and of course the North American P-51. But the P-40 filled a very necessary gap in that it was a well-constructed airplane that was built in large numbers and really was the first line of defense in some areas of the world. So getting to our airplane. So our airplane was built in Buffalo, New York, delivered on June 22nd, 1943, and was assigned to the Royal Canadian Air Force. Now in March of 1945, Pilot Officer Patton was on patrol mission over British Columbia, and he sighted a Fugo balloon and shot it down. So this aircraft is actually one of our combat veterans. After the war, it went through several owners. Eventually, it was in Colorado seeding clouds and ended up having a belly landing. The museum acquired it in 1960. It was restored in 1980. It's been in the films Pearl Harbor, Valkyrie, and this one is painted as a checker tail from the 325th Squadron that would have been in North Africa and also in Italy. Our pilot today is Chris Fahey, and he's going to fly it. I don't know about y'all, but I just never get tired of watching that. That is just...
comes again.
That was a good story. They already knew they needed something. Well, I mean, straight, right? Not really flatters, so they weren't concerned. One of being durable, high, low, and being able to take them. So it makes a lot of sense. It's like, okay.
They're not fun. I mean, they're fun.
Maybe that was a solid camera anyway, so I just rolled it a little bit.
That's enough. Can't see it.
That's necessary, but not exciting.
Yeah.
Long story short, Michelle's back to her old self.
Okay.
1,000%.
Good. You said she's getting around now. She's back on her feet. Literally back on her feet.
Like I said, we took them two walks this morning.
You see any zeros? There.